you so much. What a great little video. I feel like I have to send that to my dad. It's so awesome to be here with WGU, and hopefully I will give a sage talk. I want to say hi to everybody who's online. So I want to talk about failure today, which is pretty much my favorite subject. And I want to talk about how failure can help someone build a movement. And I also want to talk about how all of you can learn how to fail fast. So my journey always starts for me as the daughter of refugees. My parents came to this country in 1972 from Uganda. They were expelled by the dictator, and my parents basically had 90 days to leave the country, or they'd be shot on spot. And my parents got refugee status to come to this country for one major reason, because both of them were engineers. And it was the 1970s, and this country was desperately seeking engineers. So my parents boarded a plane, wearing shorts and t-shirts to Chicago, Illinois, because no one had told them about snow before, which everyone in this audience knows a lot about. And they built a life for themselves. And every night, no matter how tired my father was, he'd sit me on his lap, and he'd read to me about Dr. King and Mahatma Gandhi, Eleanor Roosevelt. So I knew from a very young age that I wanted to change the world, that I wanted to give back to this country that had literally saved my parents' life. And I thought that the way I would do that would be through public service. But I went to law school and grad school, and I found myself $300,000 in student loan debt. So I did what every good Midwestern girl thinks she should do. I moved to New York City. I got a job at a fancy law firm, and I thought that I would, make a lot of money and pay off my student loans and take off those golden handcuffs in like a year or two. Well, I was wrong. A year or two turned into 10. And I woke up working as an attorney in a financial services company, basically the opposite of public service, right? And I was just sitting there every night coming home in the fetal position. I hated my job, but I felt stuck. And it was 2008, and I was watching my mentor, Hillary Clinton, give her first concession speech. And she had this line where she said, just because I failed doesn't mean you shouldn't try too. And I literally felt like she was speaking to me. So I walked into my boss's office and I quit. And at age 33, I decided to run for United States Congress in a Democratic primary against an 18-year incumbent because I thought that that was a great idea. I had a 1,000-page policy book, 1% chance of winning, and the only thing my friends and I knew how to do was build a website, so we built one. And I remember I raised $50,000 from Indian aunties that were just so happy an Indian girl was running. But it was the best 10 months of my life. On election day, I sat there in this hotel room that was decorated in all these colored stickies that my field organizers had put up. Because, we swore we were going to win. So I sat there in my victory party that never ended up happening, holding my father's hand, watching those election returns come in. And that little ticker just would not move past 19% of the vote. I had lost. I was broke. I was humiliated. I had pissed off everybody in the Democratic establishment. And I had no contingency plan. But what was interesting is that, as I went to bed that night, the faces that I kept seeing over and over and over again were actually the ones I had never met on the campaign trail because, when you run for office, you end up going into a lot of schools. And I would go into schools in New York City in their computer science classes or their robotics labs, and I'd see tons of boys clamoring to be the next Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg. And I thought to myself, where are the girls? And this question of where are the girls literally became an obsession because, it didn't make sense to me. I knew that women today are the majority in the labor force, the majority of college graduates, we're almost 40% of America's breadwinners, And I also knew that there are a lot of jobs that are open in computing, 500,000. There are tens of thousands of jobs here in Utah in computing and technology, where you can make $120,000 as a software programmer. The problem is if you talk to any business executive, they'll tell you that they can't hire enough engineers. This country last year graduated almost 40,000 computer science graduates, of which 10,000 were women. Compare that to China, which graduated 350,000 engineering graduates last year alone. So you have this massive, massive, massive gap. And I wanted to understand why. What happened to the girls? And as I started to dig into this problem, I learned that there were two things that were holding women back. And both of them in ways have a lot to do with failure. The first thing is our culture. You know, we live in a world or a society where we used to have a Barbie doll that said, "I hate math, let's go shopping instead," right? Kid you not. I can walk into a Forever 21 and buy a t-shirt that says I'm allergic to algebra. I spent my day today talking to about 500 girls from here in Utah, and all of them had watched the movie The Mean Girls. I'm sure you have too. And you remember that scene where she gets an A on her math test and she crosses it out for a D just to get the affections of a boy? We literally live in a culture that is telling girls this is not for you. Math is not for you. Science is not for you. Technology is not for you. That you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, that it's a boys thing. The second thing is, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, is this idea that we teach our girls to be perfect and we teach our boys to be brave. I got an email from TED 2 years ago saying, we'd love for you to give a TED Talk. Will you come and say something new? I was like, thanks. But I spend my life in the company of teenage girls. And I've been a feminist my whole life. I led my first march when I was 13 years old. I am obsessed with the quest of women and girls. And I'm obsessed in trying to understand why we can't elevate our leadership. Why can't we break through that 19% of women in Congress, that 19% of CEOs, that 19% of women in the technology force? What is keeping us behind? And as I dug into it, I realized, from a very young age, we teach our girls to smile pretty and play it safe and get all A's. Don't get your dress too dirty. And we teach our boys to crawl to the top of the monkey bars and just jump off head first. I have a 3-year-old son. Yes, I know it's very off-brand. When I found out it's true. When I found out I was having a son, I did cry for a moment, but don't tell him. But so it's funny. It's funny how God gives you what you need, and I see the world in a different way through his eyes. But in one of these ways is through his swim class, and so my son's swim class, it's like half boys and half girls. And when the girls are learning how to swim, all the parents are like, "It's okay, honey. You don't have to get your face wet. Don't be scared. You're teaching them to swim, right?" But with the boys, the parents are pushing them into the deep end at 6 months. The dads and the moms. Why? Because they're trying to teach them how to be men, how to be risk takers, how to be fearless. So when these young men grow up, right, they raise their hand for opportunities they know nothing about. You meet them in a bar somewhere and they hit on you, you tell them to go away, they keep doing it, they don't care. Because they're comfortable with rejection. They're used to it. Us, not so much, right? Because we've been coddled our whole lives. From the time that we're young, we've been taught that we're supposed to raise our girls to have confidence, right? To protect them. So we don't want them to crawl to the top of the monkey bars because we don't want them to get hurt. If they're bad in gymnastics, we pull them out and we put them into swimming. We give them a trophy even though they've done really bad. We're constantly protecting them, coddling them. And what happens is that they get so used to that affirmation that they start only gravitating towards the things that they're good at. And they stay away from the things that they're not good at. One of the things that I love about coding is it teaches you failure. For those of you that are coders, or you all should be one day, coding, it's an iterative process, right? Of trial and error. You do it over and over and over again. The annoying semicolons in the wrong place, you do it over and over and over again. It's a process of imperfection. It teaches you how to fail. It teaches you to love challenge, to love that magical moment when you're trying to build comes to life. So, flashback, 2010, the failed politician, the non-coder. I forgot to tell you that. I don't code. I was terrible at math and science growing up. I was afraid of it. Had an idea. I thought, what if I started an organization that taught girls to code? And because I had failed at that election and it didn't kill me, and I lived to fight another day, I started learning how to exercise my bravery muscle. And I had an idea about something I knew nothing about. I didn't even bother to learn how to code. And I started an organization called Girls Who Code. And when we launched, I remember when I threw it out there, we couldn't get any reporter to write about it. And Twitter put up like one line on its blog, and I swear to God, it went viral, kind of like how Kim Kardashian goes viral. And I remember I love Sheryl Sandberg like I love Beyonce, which is a lot. And she emailed me at like 5 o'clock, and she's like, I don't know who you are, but what you're doing is amazing. And I'm like, oh my God, how'd you get my email? I was going to bed that night. My husband's like, how can you sleep? We're trending in Korea. But sometimes, right? Sometimes you create an idea that the world just embraces. And that's what Girls Who Code was about. And now, almost 6 years later, we've taught 50,000 girls in all 50 states, which is amazing. And I'm teaching my girls to be change makers, to make a difference in the world. And I have these amazing, amazing students like Cora, who was 5 years old when her daddy got diagnosed with cancer. And she decided at that moment, you know, I want to be a doctor because I want to save my father's life. And it wasn't until Girls Who Code that she saw that there was a connection between medicine and computer science, where she built an algorithm to help detect whether a cancer is benign or malignant. I think about one of my students, Trisha Prabhu from Naperville, Illinois. She had been cyberbullied her entire life. And one day she was reading a story about a girl who was 12 years old in her community that climbed to the top of a building and jumped because she was being bullied at school. And Trisha said to herself, man, like, how can it be so bad that at 12 you think you have no reason to go on? And so Trisha took that pain and went into her bedroom, and she built an app called Rethink. So every time you're about to send something that's not so nice, it asks you, are you sure you want to say this? So smart, so different. I've realized the power of teaching kids to fail translate to their ability to create incredible things and to solve really big problems. And so I want to leave you just with a couple of lessons that I teach my girls that I hope you all embrace. You know, the first thing is don't ever talk yourself out of an idea. I'm sure every single person who's watching or sitting in this room has thought of something before, right? Had that one idea, that company, that nonprofit, that thing that you thought that the world needed. And then you thought about it a little bit longer, and you probably talked yourself out of it. We often talk ourselves out of ideas. Right now, we're living in such a divisive world. And I think what we need today, more than ever before, are change makers. And that means every single person out there who has an idea to make a difference, to make the world a little bit better, needs to not talk themselves out of an idea. Take a step. For me, it was buying the URL, which I got for like $1.99, right? Once I had taken so many, couple steps too many, because I'm not a quitter, and I'll bet you everybody in this room are not quitters, Once I had taken enough steps, I couldn't go back. I had to give it a try. The second thing is surround yourself with rejection. And when you do, you will immunize yourself from the fear of failure. From the time I was a little girl, I used to collect rejection notes. You know, I went to Yale Law School, but I got there after I applied 3 times and got in. Nothing ever comes to me the first time, or the second time, or even the third time. So when I was a little girl, I used to collect all my college rejection letters and my law school rejection letters, and I used to put them in, you know, a drawer or a suitcase and just look at them. Just a reminder, and just to build resilience. And I still do this today. I was with Lieutenant Cox earlier, and I was telling him a story about, you know, I've run for office twice and lost twice. I'm like a serial failed politician. And so I thought one day, well, I at least can get on my community board, right? Like everybody gets on their community board. And I applied for the education committee because I know something about education. I was like, definitely can't reject me. Community board, education committee. Sure enough, the mail comes. I open up my letter. Miss Saujani, you have been rejected from the community board. I couldn't even get on to my community board. Painful, brutal. I took that letter and I taped it up on my fridge. And every morning when I get up, a glass of orange juice or my son's bottle, I look at that letter as a reminder that nobody can tell me that I cannot do something. Surround yourself with rejection and failure. It will make you stronger. I promise you. The third thing that I think is really, really important is to do something that scares you often. You know, one of the things that I think that we forget, especially as we get older, is we forget what it's like that first time when you're riding a bicycle, right? I took my son last weekend to ski. He's 3. And, you know, it's probably because he's so close to the ground, but he's like fearless, right? You watch kids, and what's so beautiful about them, they're fearless. And I watch him, and it almost makes me envious, right? I miss feeling that fearless. And so I really try now to put myself into positions that scare me. So for me, I don't know how to swim, and I hate cold water. So this past summer, I signed up for a surfing class, right? Something you should never do if you can't swim and you don't like cold water. And as my teacher was dragging me into the ocean, as I was bawling like a baby, you know, and I'm turned my head, and of course there's like a 6-year-old doing a headstand, you know what I mean, on like a surfboard, right? And I'm like crying. It was the awesomest experience ever, because even though I did not get on that surfboard that day, I knew what it was like to be afraid again, but to be liberated from fear, to be excited by challenge. And I want to feel that way often. Like when you're not living on your edge and you're feeling safe, it's time to get up and move on. And the last thing, I have one more thing I want to leave you with, is the importance of not credentializing yourself. For so long in my life, I did all the right things. I tried to go to all the right schools. I got straight A's. You know, when I was in college, I took a chemistry class, I got a B. I never took a chemistry class or a science class ever again, because somehow I thought it was so important to have a 4.0 instead of a 3.9999999. Because someone, some employer, somewhere was going to ask me for my GPA, right? And what I've realized up until the time that I was 33 is that I had done everything right. And I woke up and I still wasn't happy. But I had thought when I was young, and then as a teen, and then in my 20s, and then in my 30s, that if I did all these things, that I would be happy. And I realized that so much of credentializing yourself leads to unhappiness. And there was so much that I had missed out in my life, from taking a class in college that maybe I didn't do well in, but I learned a new topic, or gymnastics class because the first time I did a cartwheel it didn't land right. That there was so much in my life that I had missed out because I was trying to always put one more notch on my belt. And I can say today as an employer, I employ over 50 people full-time, thousands of people part-time. I don't look at your GPA. I don't even know what school you go to. All I care is, are you a hustler? Are you going to work hard? Are you going to raise your hand high for things that you know nothing about? That's what I care about. So to me, the point of this conversation is to really get you all to start thinking deeply about failure. And I do believe that if you fail fast, and you fail often, and you fail quickly, you'll be able to really learn how to exercise that bravery muscle, which will lead to a much more joyful life. Thank you.